Okay, folks, good evening. I'm Bob Massaro, and I'm really happy everybody showed up tonight. We got quite a few on the call, so that's good. I also want to thank a couple of folks here. Lene Warden is on helping us out. Dale Carlin, Linda Blake, Vicki Henry, and Susan Trask. All of those were helping us get people informed on what's going to happen tonight. As you just heard, we're recording this tonight. It'll be posted later on, probably around Saturday. And our Community Values Facebook page, you'll have that post up there. For those that are new to our community values, OCV has been active since 2015. We started again here in 2022 in February. We had Scott Denny come in and talk about the atmosphere for us, also related to fracking. In March, we had Angela Myers, our county clerk, come in and talk about security of our elections, and that was a pretty hot topic. So we let her talk. Tonight, of course, we're going to be talking about gas and oil and what's happening to our environment on that. Our next presentation is on May 26th, for those of you who want to get your calendar out. And that's going to be on health impacts related to oil and gas also, but that's strictly on health, okay? We're going to cover some of that tonight, but that's going to go further down into weeds of what that's about. We have two doctors coming in to do that. We're also going to probably do a presentation on water and do some other stuff that we got in the background now. What we're about, it's our belief that accurate information is essential for our republic to survive. With all the misinformation circulating, it's essential that trusted sources are given a platform to present accurate information. That's what OCV strives to do. We bring in experts to inform us with peer-reviewed information, so we can trust that information. A little quote here from Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan many, many years ago, and everyone knows this quote: "You're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts." And that's our point here, is to make sure we're with facts. Tonight we have three people presenting: Phil Doe, Barbara Mills Breyer, I hope I pronounced that right, and Weston Wilson. Phil Doe is an environmental director. Let's start over here. He's an environmental director for Be the Change Colorado, formerly headed the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation Policy Office for the Regulation of Federally Developed Water. He was also a federal whistleblower on 60 Minutes. I missed that one. He was written many articles on environmental issues and Colorado politics for the online magazine Counterpunch and other publications. Barbara is a retired professional structural engineer who worked in hydropower for 34 years for the Department of Interior in the Bureau of Reclamation, where she focused on element analysis. She has an undergraduate degree in mathematics and in civil engineering, and a master's degree in structural engineering. She has volunteered for numerous nonprofit focusing on the environment, and is currently serving as the president of Be the Change Colorado. Weston Wilson is a retired environmental engineer from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Mr. Williams received a bachelor's degree in geological engineering and a master's of science degree in water resource administration from the University of Arizona. Since retiring, Mr. Wilson has served on several nonprofit good governance organizations and is now the science advisor for Be the Change Colorado. As stated, OCV likes to bring in experts, and I think we have them tonight. Following the presentation, Lene Warden will be reading questions. We've received some questions over our email. And if you want to ask a question tonight, please go to the chat, type that question in, put the word question in the lead of it so it's easier for us to find it in the chat section, okay? And Lene will pick those up and read it. Lastly, a survey is going to be presented at the end of this presentation tonight. When you sign off of Zoom, that presentation is going to pop up. We would really like you guys to fill out that survey. Those answers really help us out. Before I turn it over to Phil tonight, if anyone here has a question or something to have generally about our community values, let's get it out of the way right now. If not, I'm going to turn it to Phil. So let me take a look at these pages for a second. You can either raise your virtual hand or just wave at us. And I'm seeing no one. Okay. I thank everyone again. And Phil, it's all yours to do with as you please.
Well, thank you, Bob. I'm going to turn it over to Barb, but I do want to say this before we start, that Barb and Wes and I have been working on this now for over 10 years, and our backgrounds are radically different. they think differently than I do, but we've overcome all that through friendship. So even though we may disagree on some particulars, we basically agree upon the danger of fracking and why it should be discontinued in the state. Okay, Barb, take it away.
Well, actually, Wes,
Oh, that's right. Wes is first. See,
I'm well, and you tell me, Wes, when you're ready for me to change the slide.
Okay, well, good evening, folks. I think there's like 40 some participants here, and it's a pleasure to present to you tonight. I'm going to start out sort of the way James Michener would do it, give you some geologic background so you understand the bigger picture here. So let's go to the next slide. There's a lot of shale deposits in the United States. And since about the year 2005, there's been a fundamental change in the technology of how to get oil out of the ground. If you go back to Titusville, Pennsylvania, they were just drilling a hole online. They would hit running oil and it'd come to the surface. And from then on, most of the oil development in the United States was done in loose sands where the oil had migrated deeper in the ground up to some sandy formation, some kind of trap, either a geologic trap like an anticline or a fault, where they pumped the oil directly out of the ground. But starting in 2005, something changed, big something. The industry was able to figure out how to go down and go horizontal through the shale formations, then frack them, crack them, and get the oil and gas out that way. Next slide. So here you see what I'm talking about. This is not your grandfather's oil well going straight down. They're going down and then making a tight bend and then going through the shale horizontally. Then they plug segments of that off. They send some dynamite charges down in there and they bust the pipe, and it runs fractures, mostly vertical, but some horizontal, up into the rock. That opens the pores, that opens the oil and gas to come to the well. Next slide. So here's what I'm talking about, the differences. You see this one in the dead middle here. We have a conventional oil and gas, and it's in a trap. Right, whose little thing is that? That's good.
That's me. That's me.
Okay. Yeah, point to that, Barb. You see the one in the dead middle. It's in a trap. Now go to the blue-gray below that. The unconventional, boy, this is really imaginative, isn't it? But the GS created this category, says the conventional one is where you found a trap. The unconventional one is where you find it tight in a shale, like shown here. Next slide. So here we have the actual conditions on the Colorado Front Range. So this is a cross-section from east-west of the Denver-Julesburg Basin. So you see on the left are the mountains, and you see all that basement rock, meaning granites. You know, what we see in the high mountains are those granites, and then these many formations, the sedimentary formations that were mostly Cretaceous and Jurassic age, that came from the inner sea that flooded the interior part of North American continent some 150 million years ago. So it built up in the sea various source rocks. So you see the very bottom, if you can read that, Dakota, and then J Sandstone, Cadell, Niobrara. Niobrara is the key one that's being exploited here on the Front Range. So you see how they would really dip if you came closer to the Front Range. That's not where they want to go. They want to go out there in the Wattenberg field. And you see this little darker color here. I'm colorblind, so I guess it's orange. The darker color there represents a more heated part of the sub-basin. So it released the oil better because it was heated. Next slide. This is the result of that. The result of that deep drilling with horizontal legs and fracking is thousands of wells. There's some 50,000 wells in the state of Colorado. Barbara will give you some more updated data of how many wells have been drilled since the Polis administration came in. You see on this map, this is the Rocky Mountain Arsenal down here in the bottom. Greeley is in this little kind of not so dense section. But you look where Windsor and Erie are. So it has exploded. Of course, it's slowed down a bit since COVID, but I usually say that there's rarely a dry well in this thing because they're going down, they're hitting the source rock, and they're getting oil and gas almost certainly if they in this hot, but it goes down very quickly. So that's the end of my presentation, a little background. And now Barbara will pick it up and bring us up to date.
So a lot of this information we went through the financial assurance rulemaking, which was a big disaster really, but pretty much the cost to drill each horizontal well is somewhere between $8 million and $12 million. And you need water the water has various chemicals in it. Some are household chemicals, some are PFAS, but they get sent down, like Wes was saying, and it takes 10 to 14 million gallons, which is enough for 43 families of 4 for a year. So if McWhinney is suggesting 26 wells per pad or total, that's enough water for 1,118 families of 4 for a year. And you need to keep in mind that when the rock fractures and the hydrocarbons start entering into the water, then all that water, they call it produced water. They really should just call it ruined water or toxic water. That's all brought back up. They used to put it in a big pit that was lined, but it was so horrendous and dangerous that now they pump it underground into an old well. But the bottom line is that water is really damaged and it can't be used for drinking or irrigation water again. So it's removed from the hydrologic cycle. So the other piece of information you need to know is that the cost to plug and environmentally reclaim a typical well is about $248,000. That's just a drop in the bucket compared to the 8 to 12 million. And this information came from North Dakota. They have the largest database so far for the plugging of horizontal wells. The plugging often needs to be repeated, and plugged wells should be monitored continually for leaks. There's a lot of methane leaking around the Front Range in Colorado. The COGCC latest financial assurance rules really let the operators off the hook. You'd think that when you're spending $8 to $12 million to drill, you could set aside $248,000. But they don't have to. They can get a bond or a blanket bond. And you have to keep in mind that I learned this during the financial assurance rulemaking. It can take years for foliage to prosper again at the well site. So it's not just you clean it up and it's done. So since Polis took office, 4,772 wells have been permitted. And since 181 was signed into law, 3,660 wells have been permitted. So it doesn't seem like we're slowing down very much on the fracking in the front range. As Wes was saying, there are 49,885 producing wells. So that means they're getting some oil out, but half of those are stripper wells. A stripper well, on average, over a year's period of time, they do about 15 barrels a day. And so they don't pay any severance tax if they're stripper wells. And then plugging, so I looked at how many, all this data came from the COGCC website. So I looked at how many wells were plugged each year. And let me tell you, during financial assurance, all these oil companies were saying, hey, we're plugging wells, we're plugging them, so you don't need to worry about it. But you can see that already in 2022, 7 have been plugged. So I don't know what's going on there, but if you took the average of 2018 to 2021, it would take about 30 years to plug what we already have. And at the same time, more wells are being permitted and drilled. Another piece of information that you should know is Chevron Noble, who has wells in Colorado, made $15.6 billion last year. They have over 6,300 wells in Colorado. 45% of those are non-producing. So just about half. So if you take the half that are producing, 62% of their producing oil wells are stripper wells, and 65% of their producing gas wells are stripper wells. So they pay no severance tax on this huge part of their inventory. Kerr-McGee, and we kind of understood that maybe they were the company that McWhinney might use to drill these wells. They're a subsidiary of Oxy Petroleum. So what happened is Anadarko bought up Kerr-McGee, and then after the Firestone house explosion, Oxy bought up Anadarko, but Kerr-McGee acts as a subsidiary in Colorado. They made $2.8 billion last year. And the year before, 2020, during COVID, they had a net loss of $13.5 billion. So it's not like a stable industry. As we all know, all the extractive industries are boom and bust. They have over 5,400 wells in Colorado. 22% of those are non-producing. And then if you look just at their producing wells, 41% of their oil wells are strippers, and 55% of their producing gas wells are strippers. Once again, they pay no severance tax. So one thing I did, Karen Speak kind of helped me do this, is you can get the production curve for any well. Once they start fracking the well, they have to submit this monthly. And you can see for a fracking well, there's a huge amount of activity at the beginning, but seriously, within 2 to 3 years, it's pretty much down to nothing. These are periods of time when they're shut in for some reason. And now look at, in 6 years, they're so diminished, like 90% of what they were at the beginning. And this is the production curve for a Kerr-McGee well. Here's the intersection of I-25 and 34. And this is where this Kerr-McGee well is located. So straight line over here, it's about 1.78 miles from what I understand is the McWhinney site. The other thing that is interesting is that these operators have to report spills. So far in 2022, they reported 341 spills. Some are closed, some are active. But when they do is have a spill, there's damaged soil often around the well pad. And the way they fix it is they scrape off a certain depth of that soil that's contaminated, and they often put it into a municipal landfill. So then they're pretty much concentrating all the toxins in one spot. And I know Wes can talk to you more about, there's a special landfill out on the Eastern Plains for more toxic stuff, but this is what happens really here on the Front Range. Kerr-McGee last year reported over 200 spills and releases. And you got to keep in mind, these are only the reported spills. I assume they report every spill, but
Honestly.
the fact of the matter is since 2017, they reported 476 spills. So it just seems to me their spill rate has increased in the last year. Wes and I worked on this. This is now climate change and Front Range air pollution. So the Air Pollution Control Division released the governor's greenhouse gas roadmap. And this pie chart over here, is what they said were the worst emitters of greenhouse gases. So here is electric power, 29%. Here's transportation, buildings, 21%. Here's oil and gas, 12%. Well, Wes and I went back into all of their data, and any methane source, including agriculture, any industry that emits methane, we instead of using this 25-year global warming potential, so let me back up just a second. When you present something in a chart like this, you're doing it in terms of carbon dioxide equivalent. So you take the other greenhouse gases and you factor them to make them into a carbon dioxide equivalent so you can compare. Well, the 25 global warming potential factor is for 100 years. But I think it's pretty clear to us now that methane is bad in the short term. It's more potent than carbon dioxide in the short term. So the 10-year factor is 125. When you do that for methane from all sources in Colorado, here is now oil and gas. It's up to a third of the greenhouse gases released. The other issue with greenhouse gases and the emissions of methane is that the oil industry, under EPA rules, estimate how much methane they're releasing. But various studies have been done and have shown that actually the amount released is 3 to 9 times what the industry is telling us. So if you just take 3 times and you use the more reasonable global warming potential factor, now 60% of the greenhouse gases in Colorado are from oil and gas. And then we have an ozone problem. The EPA is downgrading the front range from serious to severe for ozone noncompliance. And I put this picture in, although you can't see ozone. So this is just a smoggy day. But this is a map that NCAR created of the ozone, the surface level ozone. That is a problem. And you can see it's a problem up here in the mountains and in the foothills. That's because the prevailing winds push those VOCs and NOxes, and they combine with sunlight and produce ozone. But in the report, and I put the reference down here, it's from 2017, they said, further north, however, meaning north of Denver metropolitan area, emissions from oil and gas operations are the primary local contributors to ozone between Fort Collins and Boulder. And then this, we're all familiar with this. This is from the Marshall Fire. You know, climate disruption, it's happening. It's causing drought, high winds, wildfires, other severe weather, and it's just continuing. So it's something we need to address. So it's not just the health impacts, which are huge for the people living around oil wells, but it's also the long-term. I mean, everybody is saying you got to stop with fossil fuels. You just got to stop with it and move to renewables. They're cheaper to produce electricity. And anyway, and then this, I can give you from a website called water-data.com. This is the reservoir elevation for Lake Mead. That's behind Hoover Dam. This is the plot for this year. These are typical plots from, I think, 2017 to 2021. You can just see Lake Mead is just disaster. This is Lake Powell. It's also declining at a record rate. They're proposing, and Phil was saying that they actually constructed Flaming Gorge and Blue Mesa. Blue Mesa is down around Gunnison. Flaming Gorge is up in the northwest corner of Colorado, across the border there. And they're going to release water from Flaming Gorge to bolster up the water down here in these reservoirs. But it's just not good anywhere. And now I'm going to turn it over to Phil.
Oh, well, I won't.
I've got one question for you, Barbara, first, if we may.
Sure.
And that is, someone asked for a longer description of what a stripper well is.
Oh, okay. A stripper well. So when wells decline, they still get some oil out. And these smaller operators buy up these old wells often, and they can still make a living because they're not paying to maybe drill it. They're just taking the oil that's eking out near the end. If on average in a year's time, and I'm not sure if it's from January to December or if it's a fiscal year kind of thing, but you can get all the production data in a year, and if that production is 15 barrels or less a year, then there's stripper status.
Per day.
A day.
Per day. Yeah, 15. Thank you, Wes and Phil. Yeah, 15 barrels. So you take it over a whole year, average it by the 365 days, and then if it's 15 barrels or less a day, it's stripper status, and then you don't have to pay severance tax on a stripper well.
And Barb,
Yep.
we'll just add that in the terms of methane, it can be up to 90,000 cubic feet of methane a day. And either of those puts it in a stripper status, meaning they don't have to pay a severance tax. But as you can see, the oil and gas industry has used this exception to their advantage so that these large producers, such as Chevron, with thousands of wells, over half their wells, they pay no severance tax onto the state. They're getting away scot-free. And the state is incapable of dealing with this, which I consider treachery to the state, the taxpayers of the state. They refuse to deal with it.
Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
So
Okay,
Phil,
I'll be more, I won't be as refined as Wes, and I'll skip around a little more. It's my nature. I'm going to start off by discussing a compendium on fracking. It's in the 7th edition now, and it comes out about every 18 months. The picture on the left is from the 7th edition. I love the pictures of the vultures going around the flared the flared gas there. I think it's appropriate, symbolic. I think that it is probably the most important single reference book that you can lay your hands on. It's about almost 500 pages long. It has at least 2,000 abstracts of every scientific and scholarly article written on the subject of fracking. It's in at least 20 different categories. It's very easy to negotiate. I sent Bob a copy of part of the compendium done by our friend Dr. Wendell Bradley, who's a PhD physicist, retired Gustavus Adolphus, and you take a look at it. But I highly recommend that each of you familiarize yourself with this compendium. It's online. There's the online reference. It's in both English and Spanish. It's free, and it's very readable. What they've done is they've abstracted all these articles and put them in the plain language that everyday citizens can understand. And it's my opinion, if you familiarize yourself with that you have to believe that any plan to increase fracking or continue fracking has to be a political decision. In no way can it be justified given the science that these people present or the public health impacts that they describe. It's simply impossible. To continue fracking is a political decision. It is not a scientific or a health decision. In fact, it's the opposite of that. Okay, the next one, Barb. I'm just going to give you a couple of examples, kind of familiarize yourself with the compendium itself, and so that you're not frightened by the length of it. This is the summary. These are just the summary paragraphs on air pollution. There are 20 categories. There's water pollution, there's pipelines, there's, anything you can imagine. What they say here is, now this is just a summary of the research, and this is from December of 2020. There's a new one coming out, I would say, sometime later this year. And this is what they say. Researchers have documented more than 200 different pollutants near drilling and fracking operations. Of these, 61 are classified as hazardous air pollutants with known health risks, and 26 are classified as endocrine disruptors, another way, the way our body functions. Go on down, what I've printed and read, and I won't do this very often, but I will here, air sampling surveys find high concentrations of fine particulate air pollutants and volatile organic compounds, VOCs, especially carcinogenic benzene and formaldehyde, both at the wellhead and at distances that exceed legal setback distances from wellheads to residents. And we'll get back to the setbacks. Colorado has a 2,000-foot setback, but it's very fluid, and it doesn't apply. It only applies to putting in wells. It doesn't apply to houses. So you can backfill up to 350 or 500 feet, whatever the local ordinance is. Okay, Barbara, let's go on. And these are a couple of the abstracts on air pollution. And I think it's pretty important that people understand that when there's a lot of discussion about methane in this state and what a danger it is to climate, but they tend to disassociate methane from these other pollutants, and they shouldn't. Because where you find methane in the oil business, you're going to find poison chemicals. You're going to find benzene. You're going to find formaldehyde. You can't separate them. And the effort to do that is a miscalculation. So the cancer risks around fracking sites is very high. EPA says its lifetime cancer risks were 8 times higher than the EPA's upper threshold. That's one study. Looking down this one from February 2006, and remember, we're 2022 now. There's been a lot of science done since then. And I think this is what I'm trying to explain. Legally enforced minimal distances between well sites and residences are based on political compromises rather than peer-reviewed science and may not be sufficient to reduce potential threats to human health in areas where hydraulic fracking occurs, according to findings of the interdisciplinary team, including Colorado. Wes can probably, one of the things we brought up when Colorado came up with this 2,000-foot setback criteria was that they commissioned a study, the CDPHE commissioned a study. But in looking through the study, we discovered that they stopped measuring at 2,000 feet. That didn't mean that the benzene disappeared at 2,000 feet. It was still present. But since they stopped the measurement at 2,000 feet, that's the arbitrary distance they set. So we have a setback in this state of 2,000 feet that has nothing to do with science, but it has everything to do with politics. Okay, the next one, Barb. These are a couple. I'm going to give you a couple of studies that have come out since the last compendium. This is one that was released in 2021. It's a Harvard study. And one of the things you're going to discover is that the particulates from fossil fuel is now recognized as maybe one of the chief causes of premature death. And this Harvard study determined that actually 8.7 million people died in 2018 prematurely from fossil fuel pollution, meaning that air pollution from burning fossil fuels like coal and diesel was responsible for about 1 in 5 deaths worldwide. Now, welcome this into your community, folks. Often when we discuss the dangers of fossil fuel combustion, it's in the context of CO2 and climate change, and overlook the potential health impact of pollutants co-emitted from greenhouse gases. As I said, you can't separate them. And it's a fiction to do so. In the fracking fields, you just can't do it. They're there together. Benzene is a hitchhiker with methane. It just comes off with it. Okay, next one, Barb. The basic, I won't go into this in too much detail, but, worldwide, 1 in 5 deaths, roughly the population of New York City every year. In the United States, 350,000 premature deaths from fossil fuel pollution. It's obvious if you transition to renewables, you eliminate this yawning public health problem. In India, where, fossil fuel pollution was responsible for nearly 2.5 million deaths, age over 14, representing over 30% of total deaths in India among people over age of 14. I mean, these are startling. I mean, they should give everybody the willies. Thousands of kids under age 5 each year die due to respiratory infections attributed to fossil pollution studies. And this is a quote from one of the study principals. Our study adds to the mounting evidence that air pollution from ongoing dependence on fossil fuels is detrimental to global health. We can't, in good conscience, continue to rely on fossil fuels when we know that there are such severe effects on health and there are viable, cleaner alternatives. Okay, Barbara, the next one. Here's a very interesting study. It came up, it has to do with radioactive contamination. I mean, Wes can tell you more about this, but radioactive contamination isn't such a huge factor in traditional drilling. But when you get into these shales, these compressed shales, they do release a lot of radon and radium. And so there is a lot of radioactive contamination. This Harvard study found that radioactivity increased by as much as 40% downwind from fracked wells, 40%. And the readings were recorded as far as 12 miles downwind. I'm not a physicist, but I can read it. Radon and radium from fracking operations quickly decay into polonium-210 and lead-210, cancer-causing particles. And they build up in your system. This is what one of the lead scientists from this Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health in Boston said, if you asked me to go and live downwind of fracking sites, I would not go. People don't need to go crazy, but there is a huge risk here. And I'll come back to that, but we are going to try and measure radioactive drift off the Suncor site. Barb, the next one. Here's some other things you should probably know as you deal with the problem of fracking coming to your community. In January 31st, 2022, Los Angeles banned all fracking in the city. All wells will be closed over time. And there's no small problem. They have 5,200 existing wells in the city and county of Los Angeles. 600,000 Angelenos live within a half a mile of an active oil or gas well. And this is what one of the city council members said. It doesn't make sense in the 21st century to continue to produce oil and gas and create an enormous public health impacts that it has in the middle of one of the greatest cities in the world. On top of that, California is way ahead of Colorado and most other states as far as that goes equally. But, the state has announced that it will ban fracking altogether in California by 2024. And it hopes to ban all gas production by 2045. And they do have a ban on the sale of internal combustion automobiles by 2035. I mean, the world is moving away from fossil fuels. We have to do our part. As to the cost of closing a well, Barb said, from North Dakota, it looks like the average cost is around $280,000 per well. But you can run into the millions and millions of dollars, particularly if they've been, not maintained and left and they're old. The casings are rotting. For instance, 19 wells in Beverly Hills Unified School District, they allocated over $40 million to close those 19 wells. Now, the city of Loveland may think they're going to make a lot of money on this, but they could lose a lot of money too. It just depends on who it ends up picking up the tab. We have several instances of huge cleanup costs in Colorado. We have one out by Windsor where they actually drilled through a retired medical waste dump, and they've spent over $1 million there. The driller walked away. The public has paid for it. It's still not cleaned up. I think that the PFAS cleanup from the fire outside of Windsor, that huge fire where you could get the benzene readings 40 miles away in Boulder. I think they've spent already $3 million. Isn't that about right, Wes? $3 million on that, and they still haven't got it cleaned up.
That's right, Phil. You moved your camera. We can't see the top of your head.
Oh, well, I didn't know I was even on there. Yeah, okay. I have to, I've got a big projector there and I can't see the little one. Okay, next one, Barb. Okay, this is what is near and dear to our heart. Is the Suncor refinery. We Be the Change spent a lot of time with Cultivando, which means cultivate in Spanish, which is run by a Latina group. And we helped them put together their proposal to do continuous monitoring of the Suncor refinery. There are a lot of reasons for doing that. But the background was that the state fined Suncor after repeated incidents of exceeding their permitted releases of poisons, fined them $9 million. We applied for $1.7 million of that $9 million, and we were against all odds. People said, you're never going to get a chance. They're not going to let you do this. And the only reason we got to do it was the citizens voted on who should get the money of the community. So we got $1.7 million. Of the $9 million fine, $4.5 million went back to Suncor. So they could figure out why they have such a lousy operation, why they keep poisoning people in that neighborhood. Okay, the next one, Barb.
Brand new details for you tonight on the power failure at the Suncor refinery. This is that orange smoke billowing into the air 2 weeks ago. Take a look at that. Pretty scary. Company officials, though, acknowledged the accident, released 75,000 pounds of sulfur dioxide for the year. That's 150 times more than the daily limit. But state officials say the release did not pose any health risk.
There you go. 75,000 pounds of sulfur dioxide, and the health risk threshold for that refinery is 500 pounds. And yet Suncor said, well, there was no danger. And eventually the state agreed with them. Well, let's figure out what Suncor really is. Now, Suncor is a lot bigger than 26 wells. But what comes off of them, of the 26 wells, is very similar in many cases as to what comes off at Suncor. So some background. Suncor is owned by the second largest corporation in Canada. They're also the world's largest producer of, or miner of tar sands, which James Hansen has said, if we continue to mine that, game over as far as the climate goes. It was started in 1940. They bought two refineries, one from Conoco and one from Valero, for, not much in 2000, 2005, about $500 million, I think. They produce about 100,000 barrels of fossil fuels a day, most of the jet fuel for DIA, most of the asphalt used in Colorado, and most of the asphalt comes from tar sands. They actually bring tar sands from Alberta, 1,500 miles away, to Commerce City. Most of it, I think, goes into asphalt. But it's almost asphalt to begin with. Bitumen is almost asphalt to begin with. Okay, the next one. Here's what Cultivando is going to do with Boulder Air, which is operated by Detlef Hellman. You may have heard of him. Is they're going to monitor continuously, 50-minute increments, about 50 different chemicals and pollutants. I'm just going to hit the high points here and tell you something about them. And these will also be certainly benzene. These will be present, and particulates will be present at any fracking site. So benzene, the World Health Organization says there's no limit, no safe limit for benzene in humans. Suncor releases about 2 tons a year of benzene, but you have to realize that that's according to Suncor. All oil and gas is self-regulation. So whatever Barb told you, whatever Wes tells you, whatever I tell you is basically what the industry is telling the state. they say they produce about 2 tons of benzene a year. This EPA has estimated that it may be 70 times that chemical group. It may be 70 times that. They release about 20 tons of hydrogen cyanide, about 13 tons of hydrogen sulfide. Both of these are poison gases. Both were used in the First World War in the trenches. Hydrogen cyanide was, of course, used by the French first. And of course, it was used by the Nazis in extermination camps such as Treblinka in the Second World War. Hydrogen sulfide is another poison. It was first used by the Brits. The largest release from the Suncor refinery is greenhouse gases. They have a permit for 800,000 tons, but they release approximately 900,000 tons according to EPA. Maybe it's more. We'll find out. But that is equivalent to the tailpipe emissions from all the 188,000 cars that were bought in Colorado in 2019. So think about it. It's a huge source of pollution. Now, people can argue that, the coal-fired plant in Pueblo is a bigger producer of greenhouse gases. Well, it is, but it doesn't run very often. I mean, it produces, I think, about over 2 million tons of greenhouse gases. But if you take the entire array of poisons that Suncor puts out, there's no comparison, absolutely no comparison. The particulates, they claim about, I think, 55 tons, but, EPA says it could be 20 times that. And so what we're trying to find out from this study is just how much is going on out there. How much pollution are they releasing, and how much damage is it doing to the people in the surrounding neighborhoods? That is the whole purpose of this study. And we have 1 year. It's starting this month, basically, and we have 1 year to complete it. We need more years, but we'll get to that later. Okay, Barb, the next one. Did you have anything to say there, Wes?
What's that?
Did you have anything to say on that?
No, I think let's highlight this point that that monitoring that Cultivando will do with Detlef Helmig at Boulder Air will be the first time in any location we're going to get radioactive particulates. And it'll be quite shocking if that shows up, because this polonium-210 and lead-210 are very, very carcinogenic. And they're going to be hitchhiking a ride with the very fine particles that stay in people's lungs.
Yeah, we're actually going to do dispersion modeling of those pollutants onto the city of Denver. So this map here gives you 2 radii, 5 miles and 10 miles. And what it study just last year from the National Cancer Center said that people that live within 5 to 10 miles of a refinery have a much greater chance of contracting multiple forms of cancer than people living 20 miles from a refinery. So if you look at this map, Barb and I were joking that the people in the Denver Country Club area have more in common with the poor people living around the Suncor refinery, which are 75% Latino and 55% live below the poverty, than they realize, because they're all subject to the pollution from the Suncor refinery, at least from a cancer standpoint. Contracting cancer is elevated mightily if you live close to it. Now, you all in Loveland don't live that close, but Suncor has an outsized impact upon our air quality. There's just no question about it. The ozone problems are, Suncor is a big factor in that. Okay, the next one, Barb. These are some of the people we hired to conduct this study. On the left, you see Detlef Helming. He'll be doing the air monitoring. He has a PhD in atmospheric chemistry. He was a professor at CU for 25 years. He now runs Boulder Air. The woman at the top is Ramona Beltran. She's a sociologist at DU. And the woman below her, some of you may know her, Stephanie Malin. She's also a sociologist at CSU. They'll be doing a psychological and social impact analysis of Suncor on the people living around the refinery. The woman at the bottom left is Wilma Subra. She's longtime science advisor for EPA. She lives in Louisiana, is very, very knowledgeable about the poisons come off refineries, as she would be living in Louisiana. And she will do part of the health analysis, as will this doctor up on the right. And below right is our friend Mike Wireman, who's a hydrogeologist, and he'll be looking at the water quality issues from PFAS. And as Barb said in passing, PFAS has been used in a lot of fracking operations in the state, according to recent studies on PFAS use in fracking. Anything else you want to add there, Wes? I don't.
No, what's the doctor's name?
Oh,
Brown, Dr.
David Brown. Yeah,
There you go.
David Brown. Yeah, he was head of public health for the state of Connecticut, and he was at the CDC as as one of the major chairs at the Center for Disease Control. He's renowned. Okay. What else? I've already talked about this. Cultivando has $1.7 million, 2 components. Most of the money was spent on buying equipment to measure, but the measurements will be, they will be incomplete. We have one permanent site that's about a mile away from the refinery, southwest of the refinery. The wind directions, for the most part, at that refinery are northeast to southwest. And so we'll pick up quite a bit of the pollution, but we won't pick it all up. And we have another mobile van that will pick up more pollution. But really what needs to be done there is we need to have probes in these stacks, of which we're trying to figure out how many there really are. I mean, this place is just a crazy quilt of these kinds of stacks, some high, some not so high. But we need to have probes in those, and the state needs to help us do that. I mean, one of the problems we've always had with the oil and gas industry is when it comes to finding out what they've done, the questions of cost always come up. And, to be precise about this, the cost that they're putting an equal sign across is human health. And human health always loses in this formula. It always loses. They always say, well, it's too expensive. Well, I mean, what's a human life worth? How are we going to find out if we don't start measuring what's coming off these sites? Because right now, all we have is what the industry tells us. That's all we have. And even though 181 was passed 3 years ago and requires a cumulative impact analysis of oil and gas development in the state, nothing has been done in that regard. Absolutely nothing. And I'm not exaggerating. Okay, the next one, Barb. Well, we started this month. We're hoping that we can get some more funding. I mean, Biden's made a big push about, racial justice, social justice. I mean, if there's one place that it applies, it's to those poor people living around the Suncor refinery. As I've said, 75% are Latino and 55% live below. And the studies they've done, the city of Denver did a health study. You have elevated levels of heart problems, lung problems, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, the next one, Barb. Oh, I'm plugging myself here. I've written several articles about the Suncor problem, and here they are. If you want to read them, you can go to Counterpunch and read what we had to say. It's pretty amazing we got the money, and it's really amazing that these Latino women have taken this on. And everybody should help these people make a success of this, because in learning what goes on at Suncor, I think we can make a real wedge issue. to the argument that we need to know more about what goes on at these fracking sites because we know so damn little. I mean, right now, the state would like us to believe that if we can just get the methane measured, we got the problem solved. And as I said earlier, you can't separate them. Where there's methane, there's benzene. Okay, next one, Barb. These are some of the people that helped us, that joined in supporting the Cultivando effort to start monitoring. And I guess I should say something about that yellow plume. That sulfur dioxide, I think Wes has told me that will not be a problem on a fracking site, but it sure is a problem. The first time that occurred, they had a reverse 911 call in an area 1 mile around the refinery, telling people to stay indoors. They locked down the schools. They closed the interstate highway. And we're supposed to live with that? I want to give a plug for Richard Lamb. He died recently. I'm sorrowful over that. But he's the one politician that would actually come out front and support these efforts on fracking. He understood it. He understood what a threat it is. The rest of them hang back in the shadows if at all possible. We tried to get Diane to sign on. She wouldn't do it. Okay, what's the next one, Barb?
I guess that's it.
That's it. How long did it take? Well, we did pretty good, guys. We did pretty good.
You guys are right on time.
We have a question from the public.
Yeah, I do want to reemphasize again. I don't think that anybody that spends time on this subject can believe that to propose more fracking in the state, as the Polis administration is doing, they're proposing a 30% increase in oil and gas production. That has to be a political decision. It cannot be a health decision. It can't be based on public health, and it can't be based on the science. It has to be a political decision, and it's the wrong political decision in our opinion.
Well,
Thank you
Lene,
so much.
just 1 second. Okay, no, go ahead, Lene. Lene's going to just go through some of the questions. I know we had a couple in the chat here, and there's some that came in over our email. So, Lene, you got it.
Thank you. Is there research showing the impact of fracking on the increase of radon surrounding basements of residents and businesses? Is there a connection between those two?
I'll try that one. This is one of the reasons we enjoy these things. I've never heard this question, but it's probably not likely. Radon is in basements is a function of the geology that house sits on. So it's like, for instance, very high in Pennsylvania. And the reason it becomes a health risk is because it's trapped in the basement and all you need to do is put in a little fan and get it out of the house. But so I wouldn't expect on the Denver Front Range, as deep as this fracking is, and it's very insulated by about a mile of pure shale, I wouldn't expect that effect. But I've never come across this question. I'm pretty sure there's nothing in the PSR compendium about that. Good question.
Thank you. And we have another question. Please dispel the myth about how oil and gas creates a lot of jobs. They are counting convenience store jobs that sell gas as oil and gas jobs.
Well, I mean,
You know, I remember early on, and Bill and Wes, you jump in and tell me if I am remembering incorrectly, but when you look at the data online about what percent of jobs come from what industries, under mining, I remember it was 1% of the direct jobs in mining are the jobs in Colorado. So you're right, whoever asked that question, they include restaurant workers and gas station attendees and all, other random jobs, hotel workers, because when you bring all these men in, because a lot of the crews follow oil companies around. So they may not necessarily be Colorado people who are getting the jobs. But those people need places to stay and places to eat, etc. So I think they included those. Am I correct, Wes and Phil?
That's right.
Yeah, I think that, well, all economic activity has multiplier effect. I mean, but when we look before the pandemic, the last time I looked at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, I think there were about 20,000 jobs in mining in the state, and that included coal mining, hard rock mining, and oil and gas. I think they were all lumped together. And it seems that my memory is at about 20,000, but that has gone down tremendously. And one thing the oil and gas industry is doing, because of the risks, the public health risks, and the risks to employees, they're automating. So, I mean, each iteration of the fracking business, it needs fewer and fewer people. And that's by design. So there aren't a lot of jobs there. I mean, a few counties, and it's not important to the state economy either, as far as that, it's important to the economy of Weld County. It's important to the economy of Garfield County, maybe Rio Blanco County, but from the state stamp, it's not important to us. And yet we all suffer from the results of the mining of the oil and gas industry in Weld County. I mean, it was, what was 2012, West, when we were down in the rotunda at the state capitol, and Hickenlooper had Encana, which is now defunct, Anadarko, and Noble, which have been bought out because they were bankrupt, basically. And they admitted at that time that 55% of the VOCs in the state come from the oil and gas industry north of the city. 55%, which is the source of our ozone problem. And that hasn't decreased because so we have this internal problem where Polis says, well, we're going to increase oil and gas production in the state, but we're going to reduce our greenhouse gases. That's impossible. You can't do both. I mean, and he forgets the VOCs and all the other poisons that come along with these greenhouse gases from the fracking industry. It's just illogical, and it has to be political.
We have another question asking if you can dispel the myth that oil and gas pays a lot of taxes and creates tons of revenue for schools. Do they really pay their way?
Well, Barb, talk about sure, they pay a lot of taxes in Weld County.
Property taxes.
Yeah, property taxes, ad valorem taxes, and they do support the schools. But that isn't helping the people of Denver, the people of Loveland. We have to pay for our own schools, as we should. I mean, it's, we tax our homes. So, yeah, I mean, but statewide, it's,
And the severance tax is greatly reduced because of the stripper well status. And you can see if you were an oil and gas operator, you would see what you could do to produce just about an average of 15 barrels a day. So you wouldn't have to pay that.
You can look at it from a different angle as well. I mean, when we were testifying about financial assurance and why we felt every well should be fully bonded to get a permit to drill, we estimated the entire risk in the state was about $7.7 billion. If all of these oil companies were to go belly up and leave us with a cleanup job. And that's assuming that all of them could be cleaned up for about $150,000 a piece, which won't happen. So, I mean, you have to start balancing these, the economics, the short-term economics against the long-term impacts, the climate impacts, which are overwhelming in the trillions and trillions of dollars. The cleanup costs, the public health costs. Match that against the fact that a few people are going to get very wealthy from digging oil out of the ground. That's that's the equation. I mean, whether you like it or not, that's the equation as we see it.
Yeah, just let me make one point. Tim Gosar put up a very pivotal study here from Hunter Loving's it's Natural Capital Solutions, I think they're called. It's a 2019 report. And, you know, they make simple statements there, simple and conclusive statements, that oil and gas and mining are often portrayed as the cornerstone of the economy in Colorado, but it's no longer true. Its relative size is often grossly overstated. And Phil just talked about, what'd you say, about 25,000 jobs in mining?
Yeah, that's what I remember, Wes. I mean, this off from my memory.
This report says that clusters about 40,000 direct jobs. Oh no, and then it goes to the mining sector is the same number, 25,600.
Yeah.
So regardless of how you count it, it's about 8% statewide are employed in some way in fossil fuels. That seems high to me.
Yeah, I think it is a little high. But
this is a good report to go through and to meet that basic.
It's also true that, you know, that the high paying jobs in the fracking business, those are imported jobs. You know, they don't go to downtown Denver and try and pick some guy off the street. These guys are, you know, hydrogeologists. I mean, they, you know, are geologists and mining engineers. They come and go with the fracking. The lower paid jobs, you know, the truck drivers, yeah, they can probably get local guys.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the town of Erie just recently approved a bunch of wells and around Firestone, which was pretty startling, I thought. And people went, the town council in Erie said, oh yeah, everybody loves it. They really want it. But people went door to door around people to residences around where this fracking was going to occur, and nobody wanted it. So if your town council is likely to follow that same path, that would be a good thing to do, is just question residents, go door to door and get that data. Because I think the COGCC then denied their, what do they call those plans? Their improved management plans, or anyway. So, you know, you could have an impact, even if your town decides to move in the wrong direction.
Well, I think it's important to emphasize here that with 181, the cities have a perfect right to regulate the oil and gas industry to protect public health. In fact, the law mandates that public health and safety be the first concern of an oil and gas operation. So, I mean, the city of Loveland has a perfect right to say no for health reasons, or for safety reasons, or for cost reasons. And that's exactly what Boulder County has done. It's a de facto ban. They've just simply asked the oil and gas industry to pay its costs. And they don't want to pay their costs. They've never paid their costs. Those costs are transferred to us day in and day out, not only in health, but in closing costs. And I mean, Biden's just allocated $4.7 billion to close orphan wells because the oil and gas industry won't close them themselves. That's your tax dollar. That's my tax dollar. I mean, it's getting a lot of credit, but why not ask the industry that's making money hand over fist right now to pay their own way? It never happens. Never happens. But you really do have the right to say no to the oil and gas industry. I mean, the health and safety information is overwhelmingly in your favor and cannot be denied.
Those are
To
good
say
points.
yes.
Those are good points. Thank you. Lene, you got any other questions?
Yes, we have another question from our audience. And what is your opinion of the COGCC and the CDPHE? Are they looking out for citizens, for health and safety? And this also goes on with one that we got a little bit earlier. Has the GOCCC finalized their new rules, and are these rules sufficient to allow safe drilling?
Remember, we're being recorded, Phil.
One thing we discovered about the Air Pollution Control Division, which is part of the CDPHE, and the COGCC, is that they they don't believe the law. Phil, you might want to address this even more. 181 does not, there are certain aspects that say, they say, those are ours. We don't have to do, for example, the CDPHE regulates the air pollution coming off of the wells. The COGCC, they regulate the oil and gas pollution coming off. Now you guys jump in and help me out here. But they don't talk together. They don't seem to interact, and they refuse to think that the laws apply to both agencies. So after working with testifying over and over and over again, it's very discouraging. Like even when they were downgrading the air quality from moderate to serious, but they knew that severe was coming. They said, oh, no, we're not going to address severe. First, we have to address serious. Like, why wouldn't you just try to improve the whole thing? So anyway, Phil or Wes, you can weigh in.
Well, the COGC has been very disappointing in implementing 101, 181. Even within a narrow era of limiting the flow lines. Recall that the big disaster at Firestone was due to a flow line connected to the basement of a house. We couldn't even get a rule that the industry would remove their flow lines after they left the well pad. We just talked about the gross underbonding. We said what was required, but the state ended up not anywhere near $250,000 bond per well, but they still allow blanket bonds as low as $7,000 per well. So with that coupled with this seeming future of many bankruptcies, we're really going to pay a high taxpayer burden to close these wells properly. Excuse me.
You guys, if I interpret that, you do not think that the current incarnation of COGCC is putting the regulations in place that we need.
No.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, there are several problems made. The legislature made it, I think, probably the best law on public health and oil and gas that's been written in decades. The Polis administration has gutted it. Part of the problem is and this was in the law, and I think it was a mistake. It was an honest mistake, I think, by the legislature. But they decided on a professional commission. They pay them. It costs us about $1 million a year for those 5 people to sit down there. And their job is tied to the oil and gas industry. It's not tied to us. That was the first mistake. We need publicly elected commissions. I'm big on democracy. I think it's the only way out of this morass. And so if we need to have publicly elected commissions at both of them, not appointed by the governor, because if they're appointed by the governor, they work for the governor. They should work for us. There have to be counterbalances, and we don't have it now. It's been a disaster. I mean, unmitigated. I mean, you get some of the big greens saying, well, there were improvements. Well, the real proof is our air quality improved? Have we stopped using millions and millions of gallons of water on something that destroys our water supply? I mean, we've got a state water plan that the cost of which is somewhere between $10 and $40 billion. At the same time, we're allowing the oil and gas industry to destroy, 14 million gallons every time they drill a well. I mean, who's in charge here? I mean, and the CDPHE has not even started. In fact, they continue to deny to some degree that 181 applies to them, even though it's a state law governing oil and gas activities in the state. So and I'm not exaggerating here. I mean, I just finished a Cora with the APCD to get some clarification on, did 181 apply to them, and do they have to do cumulative impact analysis? And all we got was a dodge that if they did have an opinion, it was private. Now, do these people work for us or do they work for themselves? So that's what we got. And so I don't think you can exaggerate the disastrous result that the Polis administration has put over what was a very good law and had a real chance to help the people and control the oil and gas industry. But it's not happening. Not happening at all.
All right, Lene, you got another one?
Yes. Given the immediacy and severity of impacts from drought and reduced Colorado River that are predicted for Arizona and Southern California in 2022, how quickly do you think the severe impacts of drought and reduced water supply will become for Northern Colorado?
Well,
We all know that fracking takes a fair amount of water, although they're always quick to say not as much as agriculture.
well,
Well, climate change is drastically reducing river flow. The Bureau of Reclamation studies show that even if you have the same amount of snow, earlier snow melt due to rising temperatures gives an 11 to 15% reduction in rivers. So let me repeat that. Even if you have an average snowpack, getting warmer makes up to 50%.
Solutions such as nuclear power, hydropower, biofuel fracking, enhanced soil recovery, carbon offsets, bioenergy and carbon capture and storage, biodiversity offsets, zero net emissions, and nature-based solutions. All these solutions are being sold by corporations.
well,
What was that? What was
probably right.
it? All right.
Well, I think the climate
But
model.
how soon is the question? The climate science keeps under predicting the rate of change. And as we know, generally where it's dry, it's getting drier, where it's wet, getting wetter. The one place that the climate models don't agree very well is Northern Rockies. That is, they predicted both ways. It could get a little normal and wetter or less so. But when you go from the San Juans into New Mexico and Arizona, all the models are predicting radical reduction in river flow. So much so that the Colorado River Compact will be challenged. You see the states conflicting with each other right now on the drought management plan put up for the Colorado River. Recently, Colorado has withdrawn from its drought management plan of temporarily purchasing irrigation rights because it doesn't think there's enough water to come to irrigation. Now, this is on the west slope. So that they've dropped that thing. We're looking at going into the second phase of severe drought on the main stem of the Colorado. Barbara showed that the declining Lake Mead, if it goes below its delivery pool, Phoenix, Tucson, likely Fort Collins, Denver, will go into some type of restriction of deliveries from the river.
And one other aspect is agriculture, though there's runoff, the water, seeps in. It's not removed from the hydrologic cycle. So it is a big user of water, and they'll just have to move to different crops, I suppose. But the oil and gas industry actually removes the water from the hydrologic cycle for the most part. So it's destroyed. It's just gone.
I think that's a major issue. That's something that OCV is going to cover on later on in the summer. We're going to bring some people in to talk about water. So we're going to move on.
Okay.
Lene, you got another one?
Yes. Are there any, wait a minute. Is there any information on problems with pregnancy and birth weights near wells?
Yes. In this giant PSR compendium, Physicians for Social Responsibility, there's numerous reports, epidemiological reports, that is statistical correlations on proximity for mothers giving birth to their proximity to oil and gas wells. And the most pivotal one is by Dr. Lisa McKenzie here at the Anschutz Medical School. And she did a study of 125,000 births here in Colorado. And she found a 30% increase in birth defects of spina bifida, and congenital heart failure for women that live within 10 miles of fracking wells in Colorado. It's a serious problem.
That's within 10 miles?
Within 10 miles. She did a weighted average thing of how statisticians do of, she weighted it heavier if it was closer to that house than further away. But within a 10-mile radius, she found this significant increase in spina bifida and congenital heart failure for newborns.
Wow.
And what determines where extracted oil is used, sold, or distributed? Is there an option to keep the oil locally to help bring down costs, or is it shipped away?
Yeah, well, it's an international market. It's shipped away. If you think water goes to the
Highest bidder.
highest bidder, certainly oil, it's going to the highest bidder. There's no control. Like one of the things we showed you in that pie chart about oil and gas being a much higher contributor to Colorado greenhouse gases if you factor in the greenhouse gas warming potential and how much more comes off than reported. What that doesn't include is how much is exported from the state. So a great deal of Colorado gas does go by pipeline down to Texas.
And Micah Parkins from 350 Colorado, she then revised the pie charts to include what's shipped out of Colorado. Because
But to answer your question, it goes wherever it's purchased.
Yeah, that's one thing that, Biden opening up the federal lands again isn't consistent with the economics of oil and gas, because we are not price makers. We are price takers. The world market controls the price of oil and gas, and just because we pump more won't materially affect the price of oil. Now, it's also true that I just read an article in the New York Times that economists in the oil industry are saying that the reason that we have so few new oil wells is that the oil and gas industry is almost price setting. They want to keep the price high. They want to attract investors once again, because they lost investors. They couldn't get money. Wall Street was turning them off. But with these high prices, nobody knows how long that will last. I think it won't last that long. But Biden can't change the price of oil by opening up federal lands. That's a mistake. I mean, a philosophical and an economic mistake. That won't affect it. But most of our oil and gas goes out of state. They say 20% stays in. I think that's high. But most of it goes out of state.
Renee, another one?
Our next question is, we heat our houses with gas. If we stop drilling, what happens?
We're going to heat them with electricity. We're going to heat them with heat pumps. We can switch over. Now that's going to be costly for retrofitting, but it's certainly economical for new homes. And you avoid the health problem inside the house. There's quite a few reports in that PSR compendium showing about the health risk from using natural gas inside the house, including when the stove is off because of the tiny leaks. So we'll have to find another way to heat our house. We can overbuild with solar and wind and use that electric power to power either a ground effect heat pump or an air effect heat pump.
that's why we all have carbon monoxide detectors in our homes. It's because we heat with gas.
I mean, it's a huge problem. I mean, to transfer an economy away from fossil fuels is a huge problem, but it can be done. I mean, there are solutions, but the political solutions are not. It's the politics of oil and gas is what's slowing us down. It's not because there aren't solutions.
Recently, Polis declined to accept a bill from the legislature that would have put the the Air Quality Control Commission in charge of building heat facilities. And he threatened to veto that, so the legislature withdrew both that legislation and legislation on controlling traffic.
The
Vehicles.
other thing, Bill McKibben with 350, not, in general, he wants Biden to invoke the Defense Act to produce air source heat pumps. And just in light of the Ukrainian war and the whole air pollution and climate change, etc., and just use the government to spur on the creation of these air source heat pumps so it's not so expensive to install them.
Do you know how much the government subsidizes oil and gas development?
You get estimates all over the place. They run from 20 to $50 billion a year. I think it's really hard to put a hard number on that, but that's the range generally.
But it's not like a direct subsidy. We're giving Exxon this many $1 billion. It's tax breaks. And there, I remember I looked into it. There's you can, whatever you pulled out and sell, you don't at the higher price, you can hold on to it. There's just a lot of, and you depreciate the well, which I thought was astounding because the whole point is to remove all the oil and gas from the well. And so why would you get to depreciate it like you depreciate a piece of machinery that you're using? But those are some of the ways that we subsidize them. Those are laws that can be changed. They were put into effect like in the 30s and early on in gas development when it was hard to explore and locate a functional pocket of oil. But now they just frack anywhere and are guaranteed of some sort of brief production anyway. So they shouldn't be allowed those safeguards that were put in place years and years ago.
I mean, one of the things in Biden's campaign was that he promised to eliminate the subsidies to the oil and gas industry. Well, that hasn't really happened, has it? In fact, he's provided with the Orphan Well program, he's provided another subsidy to the oil and gas industry. And so, I mean, these are difficult political decisions that aren't being made. And, we're running out of time. I mean, the climate catastrophe is upon us. I mean, I've lived in Colorado most of my life. I've never seen a spring like this where the wind howls every day at 20 to 40 miles an hour. That just, it's coming to the point where we're all going to realize that we have to change. And I don't think it's the problem is, will it be soon enough so that we can make a difference?
Yeah, that's a good question. Lene, I know you have some other questions there, but I wanted to break in for a second. We're at about an hour and a half in. I was going to suggest we open this up. If anyone has any general questions that they've thought of here without typing them into the chat, if we can be respectful for each other. If anyone wants to pipe in with a question or a comment, I think this might be a time to do it. So let's open it up a little bit. You can unmute yourself. And if you have a question or a comment, let's hear it.
I just want to make one comment from a German perspective. My little sister in Germany, and they are now pretty much roughing it or close to with the threat of not having the gas over there. She said, "Thank you, America, for ruining your environment, your health, so we can have gas." Just a comment.
Send her our thanks.
And
This is George Garcliff's being retired USGS, another Fed. I appreciate the points that have been made, and Phil, the fact that you're pointing out that these are political decisions, but they're also, and I look at community values and the word value, and some of the decisions that politicians make are based on their set of values. And having worked with politicians, federal and state, when you try to explain this is the science, and they nod their heads, and the reply is, that may be your science, but it's not my science. And look at the world we're in, where all the science that's out there is being ignored. Ivermectin is, touted as a cure for COVID. And so as much evidence as you present, sometimes it's almost information overload. What do you tell a person when, this is an environmental disaster that's happening, and somebody else tells them, yes, but you're going to lose your job and you won't be able to pay your mortgage or your rent? What is that person's value, and what judgments are they going to make? And we're talking about global long-term goals when a lot of the politicians and the oil industry is looking at something that's near and dear to people's hearts, that you're not going to have a job tomorrow, your kids aren't going to get shoes, you won't be able to drive your car or heat your home. And what is the average person going to do? And that's, you can present all the science in the world, but until it hits somebody in the pocketbook, it's a tough row to hoe. And having spent time in the government and getting questions from the public about, what are you doing? Trying to explain the rationale of science and the importance of science. Sometimes it's like knocking your head against the wall. So I appreciate what you're doing, but I think the message, you're kind of preaching to the choir here.
Yeah.
How do you get that message across in 30 words or less is the real trick. So more power to you.
Oh, that's quite a challenge, George.
Hey.
I would say this about wind and solar. Generating electricity from wind and solar is cheaper than coal. We're closing the coal plants. Those jobs are going away, but largely they can be replaced to some extent with distributed solar and wind. But that's a change that doesn't require more money. It's vastly cheaper to do wind. Excel got 50 bids that were less costly than continuing the Comanche coal plant, even though it was already built. So that's the silver lining in that arena. The bigger challenge, of course, is transportation and building heating. Those at present are more costly. But not more costly compared to the social consequences if you don't do it. The Pentagon had a great report out about 10 years ago that the costs of dealing with climate change far exceeded the costs of not dealing with it. So we've got to get this across. I mean, the future's bright. It's cleaner. It's less asthma. It's less heart disease. It's less cancer. It's less explosions. This is a really cool future. And the beginning of it'll be less costly. It'll be more costly than sticking to the old ways. But that health benefit, that climate benefit is genuine and real. So you see 200 nations moving in that direction. And now the United States is back in the Paris Accord. So I'm kind of an optimist that people see the cleaner benefit and be willing to pay the slightly higher price as the change occurs. But what a monumental task it is to switch a planet's economy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at it on a macro level, it's almost incomprehensible. I mean, to the average citizen. But I mean, what you're facing, I think, is an example of what can be done and what needs to be done thousands and thousands of times over. And we have to tell the oil and gas industry, we don't want you here. Not only are you destroying the climate and destroying the earth, you're destroying our health. And the closer you move to us, the more our health is threatened, not on some macro level, but on a very individual and local level. I mean, that is the truth of the matter. That's what I was trying to say when Polis and these people start talking about greenhouse gases and methane, they're only telling you half of the story. The other half of the story is all the crap that comes with it. And that's the benzene and the particulates. And all of these things have very, very severe local health impacts. I mean, Germany's up against it. They get 70% of their gas from methane from Russia. I mean, that is a real problem. I mean, what, are they going to open up coal plants again? I mean, God forbid. I mean, but we can make it human size if we just have the will to do it. We don't have to rely on somebody else. We can do it in our individual lives locally. And I think everything starts locally. That's why I'm so much for elections. That's why I think all these commissions should be elected.
Good point. Anyone else have any comments?
Yes, may I? This is Avi Buckner-Opler again, and I know you, Phil and Wes, from years ago when we tried to get the moratorium here in Loveland. We were down in Denver. I even talked to the COCG in Raistel with one of the commissioners because he didn't give a damn, was playing with his cell phone while I was getting my nerves together to talk to them, and I really was not very happy, to say the least. Anyway, now I lost my train of thought. That was stupid.
Oh, okay.
I like your comment from your ally in Germany.
No, no. It was not about my sister this time. Let somebody else talk. I'll keep thinking.
Okay. It'll come back to you.
It will come back. I know.
Yeah.
I'm not that far away yet.
Yeah.
I agree. I agree that everything should happens on the local level. I'm interested in it for the health reasons, and also because a group and I tried to get the city council to reconsider fluoridating the water, because it's exactly the same situations. There's so many parallels where there are so many more health disadvantageous health results from adding fluoride to the water. And you really, there's no good reason to do it, and no good reason to do it by putting fluoride in everybody's water. It's exactly the same thing. And in order to convince city council, it's very difficult because there's no experts there. And even if you bring experts in, they were totally ignored. And the whole meeting went, it was the utility commission meeting where nobody seemed to have any idea about fluoride. And the meeting ended that the whole group of the utility commissioners decided to continue with fluoridation, except for two people, thank God for them, who said this should be reviewed at least once a year because there is new science coming out. The problem is exactly the same that you have just talked about with oil and gas. There is so much evidence, but it overwhelms people. And if some politicians just, manipulate it and ignore the science, I mean, every hospital has to work evidence-based nowadays, but city council does not have to make this decision evidence-based. And that's because we do not demand it. There's so many parallels in the problems that you have discussed today with the problems that we had. And even members of the health department totally ignored the evidence. It's incredible how much is out there. Nobody knows about it. because it doesn't get talked about it. And when it's brought up, it's made a political decision and not a health decision for the citizens.
Sounds like we're on the same track between both your issue and the oil and gas issue. Anyone else have a comment?
Anyway, it came back to me. I told you guys I would remember. My brother told me that even though he dislikes the idea that Germany might have to go back to nuclear power. And another friend who is very much into alternate energies in Germany told me that, and you tell me if you have heard about this, that there is a new way now with nuclear power where there is nothing left. Everything is burned up. There is nothing left that you have heard about it, Phil?
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you know about it?
Well, I'm not a nuclear physicist, but
I'm not either, but
I think it's, well, first of all, Germany banned nuclear reactors, and that it should stay that way. I mean, first of all, the entire production cycle for nuclear power plants is huge, a lot of waste, and there's no such thing as a perpetual motion machine. It just we don't have fusion, and I read a lot about what's going on, and I'm very close with a physicist friend of mine, Wendell Bradley, and he just doesn't think it's possible. But we do know what is possible.
Yeah.
Sun and wind are possible. I mean, that's a technology we understand. It works. I don't understand why we can't get on board with what works and do it. But I think the major problem is because it's free. God, it can't be worth anything. It's free. There's a nuclear power plant clear out there. So I don't know how many miles away is the sun. It's a big nuclear reactor. It works all the time.
Right.
This is where Phil and I have a little bit of disagreement. I can see why some people would move towards nuclear power because it doesn't have greenhouse gas. But I think the economics is trump that. We're past nuclear. That's the 20th century. The 21st century is wind and solar with backup. So it's less costly. We don't need to make electricity by more expensive methods than the pollution-free methods we have.
I agree with that, but on the other side, think about how much room we have here in America compared to Germany. Germany is about the size of Colorado and Idaho together. How many people do we have living here? About 5 in Colorado, 5 million. How many in Idaho? About 3, maybe 4. So 9 million. In the same area, we have 84 million people living. So where do you put all the solar panels? When I was last time home, I saw all the farmers, every shed, every house had solar panels.
Good.
But in this country, and I talked to somebody up in Fort Collins who said he wanted to put solar on our house. And he said, where do you live? I said, Loveland. And he said, oh no, that's trouble. Right away, because they know that our city council made it really hard for us to get reasonable solar panels on the house.
That's true. Excel being a monopoly has got the Public Utilities Commission to limit homeowners' solar size. The view there is from the Public Utilities Commission, they don't want so much private solar development that it's hard for the monopoly utility to handle it on the grid. And keep in mind, they're providing something else. The utility is providing standby power. So if you're not producing solar, there's still standby available power. So we have to work those things out to get better distributive. It's a good thinking is going on at the Stanford University and the Solutions Project. And their remedy is not just to build everything that you need electrically by solar and wind. Their solution is to do that 3 times over. To make that much capital investment in solar and wind, that you have 3 times as much as needed in current demand. And then that allows you to switch manufacturing and cement grids, cement kilns, everything over to being heated by electrical, the system. But it's a pretty far out plan, and there's no state pursuing that 3 times overbuilding.
Yeah. Renee?
Thank you.
John Case,
One other comment about the nuclear power is you still have the problem of where the uranium is mined. We were
Where do
able
you
to
dispose of it?
bamboozle a lot of Native Americans into taking it from them, but they're catching on to us. And right now, the waste is stored on site at the nuclear power plants. So, and look what's going on in Ukraine. Somebody could bomb a nuclear power plant, and I mean, it could be disaster. And the last thing is, you put up wind and solar pretty quickly, but it takes a decade to design and build and bring online a nuclear power plant.
Yeah, Barbara, I can agree with you on that. I worked for the Long Island Lighting Company for a short period of time, and that was over a 10-year project, and that plant got plowed under. They couldn't get it up. Lene, I see a question here from John Case. Is that a previous question?
that is not a previous question. That's a new question. And John always has interesting questions. Where is the project on algae-produced energy going?
I would say that that's an advertising ploy by the big oil companies, because I think they were the ones doing that, along with carbon capture. Do not believe in carbon
It
capture.
could be in that category. One of the ways to do algae is to take CO2 out of a coal plant or a gas plant and run it through and use that as some part of the food base for algae. You remember diesel, the word diesel means running an internal combustion engine on vegetable fuel. You know, that's what diesel invented. But I don't know about large scale algal biofuel. I don't know much about it.
I mean, it amazes me why the thing that just keeps hitting us in the face like a wet fish, we just refuse to recognize. I mean, it is true. I mean, everybody that's looked at our power demand now says that we will have to reduce the amount of power each of us uses. But if we don't, then we face almost certain death, or at least the collapse of civilization. We have the sun, we have the wind. I mean, why don't we put it drives me crazy to think that we can't focus on what we have and try and move into the future using what we know we can do and hope that something else comes along. And if it doesn't, we haven't lost anything. We haven't lost. I mean, it just seems to, I get lost in these arguments. I really do. I mean, everybody knows that we'll have to reduce our consumption of energy. Everybody understands that, has looked at the problem for a lot of different reasons. So let's do it. Let's develop a plan. Let's start doing it.
That's exactly the point, I think. It's absolutely the point you said. In this group here, we're preaching to the choir. Obviously, there are people who agree here. I haven't seen many who didn't. And, if fear works to keep people away from going forward, probably the next step for a group like this is to work on what can be the solution. How can it be communicated to the public so they can see a way out rather than just being made afraid?
Great segue. We are almost out of time, folks, and I want to be respectful for everybody. We've stayed in here for almost 2 hours now, and it's amazing that this conversation is continuing to go. On the survey at the end of this, we asked the questions that you just put forward. What can our community values do differently to improve what we're doing? But also what suggestions you have and what topics you'd like us to cover. And I think, Phil, your frustration is bubbling over, as many of us are. The science is here. And I know that the documents you have referenced, I looked at them a long time ago, and thank you, Phil, for sending them again. You woke me up to it. If you want peer-reviewed information that's valid science, there's a wealth of it in there. But the issue is, and Phil has made this many times, all of you have, is the political will isn't here. And I believe it's going to take us as individuals to begin to force that political will to change.
Absolutely.
It's going to be a hard road, but we have to do something. The evidence is overwhelming of what's happening now with the fires, the change in weather patterns. If I remember right, Lake Powell was within 20 feet of going Deadpool.
Right.
And dropping water from up north into Lake Powell, that's a temporary fix because you just drain those lakes also. If we're not getting the water to fill the lakes with, the rest of it's irrelevant. We're building 2 new dams up here in northern Colorado. That's one. What are we going to fill it with, right?
Well, I love those dry dams.
Yeah, right. Big hole in the ground. Terrific. All right. If anyone else has anything else, let's pop it in now, or we're going to call it for the night. Anyone else have a comment they want to make?
I have a personal comment. I mean, it's my own and didn't come from anyone else. And I want us to understand that, yes, politics is sluggish at best. But I've heard President Biden's name come up a lot. But I'm thinking he kind of is carrying the weight of Congress behind him, and they're not helping very much. We've got people on the Democratic side who are doing everything they can to prevent anything that might put oil and gas under any kind of control because they're making a lot of money from it. And of course, we've got the Republicans whose sole purpose is to keep Democrats from being, and keep President Biden from being successful in any way. And so I hate to think that it all rests on his shoulder. Because it really rests on ours. And I think that if nothing else, we need to call as many representatives of both parties as we can, and we need to put pressure on them. And we need to tell them, this is what we want you to do. And that's what we can do. And if you find their fax number, send them 10 faxes. Because then it has a physical form and it looks like a lot of people. But we have to do some of this, and we have to do it at the local level, and we have to do it at the national level, and the state, of course.
I think the local level, I was going to add to it, you finally did that, because it takes all of us doing something. I know our city council needs the same thing. Ivy, you got your hand up.
Yes, this is easier than finding the button. One thing that amazes me, I mean, you know that I'm part of different groups. I don't know everybody's name, but I did not see anybody from RNL, and I did not see anybody but one person, I think maybe 2, from the Centera people, from the High Plains anti-fracking group. And that's, I think, is a problem. We need to work together with the different groups that all are looking for the same goal.
I'll put a plea in here right now. The way we have moved out here, we were in a newspaper this time, which is a small contingent of people. Reporter Herald doesn't cover that much. Vicki Henry got us into the Estes Park newsletter. She runs up there. Some of us put this out personally, and our Facebook page was out. I'm asking you during the survey here to say where you found out about this. We need to spread the word more. And it seems that the commercial ways of doing this are not getting the results. It seems to be word of mouth, friend to friend. So for our next event, which is on May 26th, if I have the date right in my mind, don't quote me, I'm not good with calendars. We have 2 doctors coming in, Dr. Danforth from Loveland here, and Dr. Corey Carroll, which I know most people that are involved in the fracking environment know very well. They'll be presenting on May 26th, 7 o'clock at night, same time as this one. But I'd ask everyone here to get your own little network going to expand this, because we can't keep an echo chamber. I don't know who's here tonight as far as echo chambers. Most of these names I do recognize. So we need to bring other people into this pool in order to exchange this. I was lucky enough last night, I'll take a moment of, private privilege here. I got into a thing last night, which was a surprise. It's Unity, Colorado or something. I forget what the actual name of it is. It came late last night, and it was a thing to sign up for. And what happened is you were paired with someone. You didn't know who it was. And they gave you around 12 questions to answer. Me and my partner ran over by about 20 minutes. The thing that surprised me, and it surprised her also, we were both on the same page, top to bottom. The questions looked kind of prejudicial, or slanted to one side, which was okay. What surprised us, and we talked after we answered the final question, what did we expect? I expected to have someone with opposing views than mine. Now, this is not our community values now because we're nonpartisan. Most people know I'm a Democrat. I expected someone from the other side so that we could have a real honest conversation about what was happening. It ended up that the both of us were pretty much right down the line. We had the exact same views. And when I asked her what was her thoughts, she said she came into it the same way. She wanted to talk to somebody that had opposing views to her so that she could begin to understand, as I did. So we don't know what the algorithm was for matching people up, but they matched up two people with almost the exact same views on most of the stuff going on. I understand they're going to do that again. I have no idea where this came from, by the way. It just came in my email and said, would you be willing to join this? I said, yes. And an hour later, I was online. And it wasn't Zoom, by the way. It was some other package they're using because it didn't match up to what I was using. So it was an interesting experiment. And I know I believe they were trying to get opposing people in. That's what our community values wants to do. We want to bring in people with other views so that we can sit here and talk. And that's why I opened this up a minute ago to say, let's talk with each other. Most of us are on the same page here. I haven't heard anybody say that, they're a person wants to put a well in their backyard so they can make some money from the minerals. I didn't see that, okay? So I guess my message here is the next one is going to go out. You guys, if you've registered for this, you are on our email list. You can always drop off. There's a thing that comes out in the MailChimp that just says, drop me off it. You can do that. Please spread the word more. We need to get more people involved. We had 86 people sign up, if I remember right, tonight. We had 46 or 47, 46, I think was the number, which is about 50% of the people that signed up. So we need to expand this. So that'll be my plea to everyone here is to please spread the word in your local network, word of mouth, okay? Lastly, I want to sure thank our three presenters tonight. This has been incredible. The amount of information coming in is horrendous here. And this is science-based information, which is what I want. And I think we all want that, right? I don't want the political stuff here. I want science-based information. If we could only figure out, as Phil's been, I'm surprised he's not jumping up and down and screaming here, how to get our politicians to get up to speed to say, you know what, the science is real. We got to do something. Or our kids are now going to live in a different world. I think we're past that point. It's how bad is it going to be for them? And that's the problem I think we got to face. So if anyone has anything else, I'm open for it. If not, we have just hit 1 minute over. I can't thank everyone enough for being here tonight. And again, the thanks to Barbara, Phil, and Weston for participating here and putting this thing together.